Hello, everybody. Welcome to another film, Flashback. This time we are joined once again by the lovely and talented Liz Seda, and we've decided that we would flash back to one of the biggest blockbusters of the late 90s. This is 1996, Twister.
Potentially could be a storm that has winds in excess. Now, let's assume the worst at this point.
Joe! Bill! It's coming!
All right, guys, Twister. So we're talking 1996. It's a disaster movie, obviously. If you haven't seen it, you can guess what it's about. It's about twisters. It's about tornadoes. But even more specifically, it's about tornado chasers. So we've got Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton. They are not quite divorced yet. People who they're tornado hunters. And we've got Cary Elwes, is how you say it, as our super sort of villain guy. But he's mostly just scientific competition. And the whole movie, pretty much from the jump, they are just chasing after tornadoes in the Midwest United States because they have a fancy new machine that they want to use to try to get some detection devices up into a tornado so they can gather all that data, and then, it'll advance the scientific community's understanding of tornadoes, and they'll be able to let everybody give better warnings and things like that. And that's kind of like your basic plot, which I like because after that, the little pieces of character development creep in, just sort of just piecemeal, keeping you interested. There's no massive dump of backstory all at once necessarily. That's pretty good how they make it move along. Amazing supporting cast of people who are these fascinating characters, really high level actors too. And the movie is just kind of it's a really awesome balance. Michael Crichton, one of the big writers on this movie, so you know him from Jurassic Park and Andromeda Strain. And it's one of these 90s movies with a real human center. It's about regular people that you can understand, even though they're not in a profession that you have, in an extraordinary disaster kind of situation, but not something unbelievable. This isn't about aliens. This is about a real life threat. So did you guys see this movie back in the 90s, or did you have to see it later?
Oh yeah, definitely saw it in the 90s. And Liz told me in confidence that she sympathizes with the twister in this movie. Yeah. Just to make that clear to the audience going into it.
Look, I don't, it is a character, and there are many iterations of it, and that's what makes it so unpredictable and really adds the necessary edge that I think the movie really needed. As interesting as Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton are, you need that added edge.
We're going off topic already, but I think when you do look at a natural disaster and something like a tornado, a hurricane, if you look back from ancient history, when we used to tell stories, whether it be Homer, any of these stories like Beowulf, right? We had Grendel and Beowulf, it was this evil personified, and our kind of natural disasters and elements, especially we're at least quasi equipped to handle. We have storm shelters now that can sustain tornado force winds. They are the epitome of evil in a lot of sense, especially back.
It's almost like fighting a god, a mythological god.
So you can imagine why they thought, back in the Greek and Roman times, wow, someone's really pissed because this twister's coming through and it really messed up Tom's house. A lot of Greek guys named Tom back then.
But that's kind of true, Nick. But it's also something along those lines is alluded to in this movie. As we find out further along down the line, part of the backstory is that Helen Hunt lost her father to a tornado, and she has this line at some point where she's trying to say to Bill, his name is Bill, and the character's name is Bill, where she's saying to Bill that you don't understand, you'll never understand, because why did it miss that house, and hit mine? And it's that notion of is it random? And let's keep it from being random. But it's just subtly creeps in there. This motivation for her character on top of being a scientist is she knows what it's like when a tornado hits. And tornadoes do feel random. I didn't grow up in tornado country. I mean, I've been around one or two, but when you look at the devastation, you literally see one house gone next to another house that's perfectly fine. It feels like a roll of the dice with nature. Or if you're inclined to think, go, was I targeted? Did I do something to piss off the gods?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the first scene in the movie is her. I mean, when the first time I saw the movie, I didn't put that together, that's her as a little girl.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's a pretty heartbreaking scene. I mean, I think this movie really gets into it fast. So the very opening scene that Liz is talking about is a family, again, in just sort of the Midwestern United States, and they have to run for their shelter. And it's a girl, and she's got a little dog, which is named Toby, and looks very much like Toto. They really go for the Dorothy thing in this movie, the Wizard of Oz thing. And it's mom, little girl, and dad hide in the shelter, but dad is struggling to keep the doors closed. The doors rip off.
First built tornado shelter doors ever.
Dude, paint does a number on wood doors. If when are you going to replace them? How often? And he just literally, you watch him get sucked out. It's 4 minutes into the movie. You watch him get sucked out into the tornado, never to be seen again. And I was like, man, this movie is not pulling punches. Mm-hmm. It's like a horror movie in a lot of ways, and it's like that's an early kill.
You know what? I was reading about the development of the script. So it's a Michael Crichton book, and I have to look and see what his contribution was in the screenplay. But the idea to have the dad die in the beginning, that was Steven Spielberg, evidently. When he came in and Amblin came in, they're like, yeah, it's a really good story. We're going to kill the dad. He's got to go in the beginning. Otherwise, it's powerful. It makes it more powerful. The stakes are incredibly high from the moment we're there. I mean, when you think about this, came out right after Jurassic Park, or a couple years after Jurassic Park.
This is 96. Jurassic Park was 93.
So a few years after. If Jurassic Park, a perfect movie, maybe one day we'll do an episode of that. Perfect, in my opinion. The opening scene of Jurassic Park, the Velociraptor kills the guy. Like if you can raise the stakes high in the beginning and show the audience what the risk factor is, you're already setting yourself up. And so this is a popcorn movie. It's nonstop. And you're just constantly watching everyone be on the verge of death the entire movie. And what the separation of this and like some other disaster movies is whether it's that it was well acted, or they set the story with the dying dad or whatever it is. We actually cared about these characters. And that's the big difference between this and other disaster movies that just fail miserably.
Yeah, and you really, because obviously Helen Hunt she's a very good, strong female lead in this movie. I love her work just from all time. She's so great. She was shooting Mad About You at the same time as she did this movie. Actually, she was late getting back to Mad About You because this movie went over.
Were they mad about that?
No, Paul Reiser was very not mad about that, which was very cool of him. But she's so strong-headed in this movie and so stubborn. And at times you're like, "Lady, you're crazy." But then you think back, okay, when she was a little girl, her father got sucked up into a cyclone in front of her very eyes. It instantly, it's all forgiven. Like you get it. Her emotional journey is set in stone. She's
and at one point, one of the many tornadoes that is in this movie, because there's a lot of them. At one point, they see some destruction and they see a family like looking at their destroyed home, and she just says, real simply, she's like, they had no warning, they had no idea it was coming, and just reinforcing all the reason why you would take such an insane risk. Is and they're always setting up the altruism of that group, because we have the parallel group of tornado hunters, which is Cary Elwes' character, where he's like, Jonas, all of his cars are black. It was like the old time Western where the bad guy always had a black hat on, whereas like that he's the bad guy, but he doesn't like sabotage them or do anything bad like the whole movie. At one point, he looks and sees that their car is wrecked, and he doesn't stop to ask how they're doing, but he sees that they're fine, and it's like...
I do that all the time.
Like, that's the first thing he does. Well, it does everybody eventually. You have to drive past. But it was like, he didn't see someone bleeding out, is my point. And he doesn't do anything bad the whole movie. They just have to, but they stick a line up front. They go, he's in it for the money, not the science. I'm like, yeah, but he's going to do the science. Yeah. So in the end, I don't care why. As long as he does the useful thing, what do I care why he's doing it? He wants to sell a book. Okay, cool. Is he going to advance science in a selfish for a selfish purpose? I don't care what his purpose is.
Yeah, it's almost, we might need to come up with an actual, call like the Iceman paradox. Like, we watched Top Gun, and Iceman's not really that bad at all. It's Maverick that's kind of the jerk. And like, what's so bad about wanting to do science and get paid at the same time? It kind of seems like that's what you'd want to do. He's not an indie rock band, that all of a sudden he's doing. And even then, it's like, yeah, isn't the idea to make a living out of doing this thing?
Yeah, but you have to. I mean, these are two groups of mega nerds, and he had the audacity to steal their IP, basically their patent, their whatever.
Yeah, they were like, "You stole my idea." He's like, "You're an idea you never realized, you never finished." Like, Bill Paxton's character is all pissed off, and he's like, he almost like knocks Carrie in the face, and he's like, "You stole my idea." He's like, "Aren't you a weatherman now? You're not even doing this. I was gonna actually like finish it, like get it done. Like, what good is the idea if you were just going to sit on it and go report them on the news?" And I'm like, I don't know. I just didn't think I thought they kind of shoehorned a bad guy in there.
Well, I know a lot of his stuff got cut. I did read where a lot of the things they shot got left on the cutting room floor.
It was. I thought the story was compelling enough to have Helen Hunt, Bill Paxton, and their team versus the tornado.
Right. That's right. I mean, that's what we talked about in the open. The villain's a tornado, it's like the white whale, but it's also the villain. It's like, it's cost them their entire lives, and like literally family members have died because of this thing. You don't need Carrie Elwes.
This was a pretty serious blockbuster. We mentioned that Steven Spielberg's an executive producer on it. Kathleen Kennedy's on this. It was hyped pretty well. The trailer is really cool because it's kind of like spooky, almost like a horror movie. And but it was hyped, and it should have been hyped. So let's think back to the things that were hyped as blockbusters in the 90s, and how it's not exactly the same now, 20 plus years, 25 years later. It's just different stuff. Once Marvel happens, then Marvel sort of takes over the summer blockbuster world, and then other people are trying to do it, and you're trying to make a franchise and stuff. But this was like, no, there was a one-off kind of movie, and there were a lot of disaster movies at the time. Thinking of like the Core and Deep Impact and like Armageddon are all like the same idea and things like that, where it's like an asteroid's coming to destroy humanity. Or the disaster movie had a moment, and I think like while we were in it, we didn't think about it as being in a moment, but we'll probably look back and go, yeah, that was really popular. Natural disasters. You had Dante's Peak is another one that comes out around now.
Yeah, I love Dante's Peak. Yeah, there are a lot of guilty pleasure mid 90s to late 90s. Just that sort of thriller action disaster movie. And I think Nick had said earlier, so many of the effects were practically done, and that was it's so obvious that even though obviously in Twister the tornadoes are not real and the sky looks a little not so convincing, but a lot of the effects were practical, and I think it it just lends itself to that more authentic like 90s action, like they really did this. I just think
actually, yes, but there's only so much of it that's done practically. They did a lot of amazing practical things like dropping tractors out of the sky and stuff like that. And there's a lot of great stunt work with the cars. However, some of the most memorable moments of destruction aren't practical at all. I mean, first of all, I think the tornadoes look great. And also there's a couple of, if you guys ever watched, there's a YouTube channel that these guys do an amazing job, VFX artists called Corridor Digital. If you guys don't know it, go check out the Corridor channel. At one point they were reacting, one episode they were reacting to Twister, and they were going into some detail about how like that first barn that gets ripped apart, and how they had to do it using computer technology in the 90s, because we have things that you can use now that can do a lot of that, get you most of the way there pretty easily. But back then, they literally had to build that whole barn in their computer system like it was in Legos, like one piece at a time, so that when it flew apart, every one of those pieces would go somewhere specific. And then that house that rolls into the road and they drive through it,
Oh, yeah.
that's a digital house. That's not a model. That's a digital house that looks incredible. And the guys are talking on that channel. They're like, we know the dude who worked on that. He told us he spent himself 6 months just working on just that shot of a house rolling into the road so that the car has to plow through it. And it's like, those digital effects look really great too, partly because they're not trying to do digital animals and stuff. When you see the cow flying through, it doesn't look so great.
Anything flying through the tornado didn't look good, but I thought the house looked good. And I thought overall, yeah, I tend to agree with you, Clay. I think the CGI did look good. And I saw that one of the reasons the director took this is because he knew. So we're getting like the CGI is coming around the time, John DeBont. And he's like, this might be my last chance to make a big budget practical effects for the most part movie. And he's like, I'm in.
Yeah, he was. Wasn't he supposed to do Godzilla before that? And I think he.
Check out our episode on Godzilla.
Shout out to Liz's last episode.
No, but I'm trying. I can't remember all the trivia, so I'm not going to spread false information. But
he was the same director who did Speed. So if you watch Speed, you realize, like, obviously this guy loves wall-to-wall action movies that are done with, stunts and practical effects and things like that. And he's done
a ton of cinematography for like Die Hard and Basic Instinct, and I mean he's got a crazy filmography there. So yeah, he knew what he was doing. At least. Yeah.
It's also just there's something visceral that I always keep every episode we seem to talk about practical versus digital effects. I always think back to the difference between theater and film, where it's like in the theater all you got to do is have a character slap another character and everyone in the audience like winces, whereas on film you got someone get hacked their arm off with a chainsaw and they won't react, but when you're in the theater for something, there's visceral about it, and you can sort of tell when that's a real truck in the movie slamming into the bridge. You can sort of feel it. And even though a truck getting into a minor car accident isn't a big deal, when you can feel that it was really there, that a camera was really there, and that somebody said action, you got it in your guts. It's very affecting. It's very grounding.
Yeah, well, it sounded like DeBont was kind of a nightmare throughout this whole production. I mean, like he actually sunburned Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton's retinas by using this special light to make the sky look really cool behind them or whatever. So they couldn't shoot for like a couple of days or whatever. I mean, this guy, he sounded a little nuts as far as committing. And like Helen Hunt like would whack her head repeatedly on this, like on that bridge when they were in that underneath the bridge scene, and she had like a concussion. And he's like, oh, she's a little clumsy. And Helen was like, yo, I think I've been a pretty good sport about this whole thing. But he seemed like he kind of sacrificed some of the well-being of the cast and crew for.
Well, I don't like that.
We need the shot. Yeah, I saw. I mean, I was reading about how they did so they had massive wind turbines for some of the shots. And one of the things I look out for all these movies when there's something like that is how many PAs were sitting in front of the wind turbine just throwing random shit in front of it during the tornado. And then there's another, I guess like they had bought out like, I don't want to say the entire state, but like every resource they had to get ice for the hail machine. They like had to go to different states to get it because they had bought so much.
They were going to shoot the movie in California, which I'm trying to think where would they have shot it? Anywhere in California. And DeBont was like, no, we're going to shoot it in Oklahoma. But I'm like, how would they have?
Well, I mean, there's some spots as you drive up north past Bakersfield and stuff. There's little spots, but you'd have to try to avoid getting mountains in the background.
Yeah.
And then you'd have to try to, account for the fact that nothing's green except for the fields of like strawberries and stuff. And I was like, dude, it's corn. You gotta shoot where they're driving. They have to be driving through a cornfield. They can't be driving through.
Yeah.
So avocado farm and almonds. Yeah.
I'm glad that they ended up not doing that because it really, I mean, it feels authentic in a great way. Yeah. And I think the color in the movie is actually pretty beautiful because a lot of the time you're having to shoot. Most movies you're shooting indoors or outdoors, but it's day or it's night, and it's like, well, is it hot or is it cold? Is it sort of shady? But the color, when you're there, and everyone who's ever been around a huge thunderstorm knows how weird outdoor colors are, because you got like shadow on one side and not on another, and it's interesting colors, blues and purples and oranges and pinks and things like that. And so how do you light your actors so that they look like they're outside during the day, but there's a nasty tornado? It must have been a fun challenge. The guy who was the cinematographer on this is this guy named Jack Green. He also did Unforgiven, which is another movie that we did on Film Flashback. And I was like, that movie also uses a lot of natural light. Unforgiven does. And like, it just shows that he sort of loves and understands how to shoot in the natural world. You guys are talking about what it was like on set. I'm fascinated because they were outside a lot.
Yeah.
Just on like a lonely road somewhere, or like a dive, they weren't in downtown LA. Mm-hmm. It's like, what was the set like out on the road?
I know. It really seemed like just a fun location. Everybody was buddies and had fun. And I supposedly the weather in Oklahoma at that time was very tempestuous. So
that's a SAT word there.
Yeah, you know what. The SATs were no longer a thing. But yeah, so it did make for lighting things and just, having rain or just a cloudy sky, period, kind of a difficult task.
I think if they were looking at doing, was it just they wanted to shoot in LA and play it as Oklahoma?
I don't know if it was in LA, but it was definitely in California.
They just wanted to shoot because it's I think the reason this movie works is because it's in Oklahoma and like we have such a small nucleus. These characters, we haven't even talked about Philip Seymour Hoffman yet, but Dustin plays the character Dustin in it, and like he's fantastic in it. There's all these characters in it. It almost reminded me of like a minor league baseball team. You got these guys that like are not quite the big time, but they're hanging around. I think you do this in LA. You have exactly what we got in like the late 90s, early 2000s with disaster movies, which is just like all CGI and explosions and no story. I think this works because there's some story.
It's an incredibly human story, and I think pretty deftly directed when it came to that supporting cast because, dude, you've got people, like you said, Philip Seymour Hoffman, but also everybody in it, you go, oh, I recognize them. Oh, I recognize them. You've got actors that were also in movies like Ferris Bueller and The Rock and Saving Private Ryan and Fight Club. Like, these are not nobody background people. These are people who are just incredible actors, and yet they didn't overplay those characters in a way to like, let's show them off. Philip Seymour Hoffman got a lot of time to throw in quips and one-liners and stuff, but it wasn't annoying because he's amazing, maybe. But the other characters were just good. They just got enough screen time to support the story, flesh it out, make it three-dimensional. Not so much that we were like, not so much that it took me out of the movie. Occasionally a movie will just be, they just give somebody a backstory for no reason. And it's like, no, let's focus the story. The story is extremely focused on basically these two characters, Helen Hunt's character and Bill Paxton's character. And it allowed you to sort of really spend enough time with them to care about them and the disaster that they were in, and not too much about everybody.
Well, I would say outside of maybe Philip Seymour Hoffman, I feel like every other character had to create this team that was a vehicle to tell us about the past without too many flashbacks, and about who Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton were.
Yeah, so Jamie Gertz's character, Melissa, who is the new woman in Bill's life that he's going to marry.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's cool that she's there because she represents the rest of us who aren't tornado hunters. So it's like she's all freaked out by everything, as most anybody else who went to see the movie would be. And she also is there as the very, very obvious purpose of she needs to ask a bunch of questions and have people say a bunch of backstory out loud.
Well, she's a therapist in the movie.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
There.
Yeah, but it's like, okay, but it's true. If she's not there, then they don't have to. They wouldn't be explaining to each other, well, this one time this and this happened, and then this other time Bill said this, and they used to have this. And this is how a tornado works, and all that science talk that gets drifted, which is so Crichton. All like the really specific scientific details that they throw in there, and like how the scientists talk to each other. They wouldn't have to explain that what's the difference between an F3 and an F4 and an F5. They needed a character in there, which she is. Which is the audience, which is, we're stupid. And so they have to explain it to her so that people at home go, okay, F5, that's a big deal. She's
literally the barometer for how
Oh!
It's
sorry. All right. Weather movie. Had to do it.
Did you guys like, we've seen this story before, divorcing couple that ends up not eventually finishing off the divorce and they end up together at the end. It's like I immediately thought of the first one off the top of my head was Liar Liar, and I'm like, oh, Cary Elwes is in that too. Home Alabama does that. Like, there's a lot of movies where it's got and it doesn't make for a lot of drama for me anymore. I'm like, okay, so they'll end up back together. There's a really notable exception that Helen Hunt is in, called Castaway. But where you're just certain at the beginning that these people will get back together. In that particular movie, it takes an interesting twist. But I don't know. Did you care about that story, or were you just kind of like, yeah, of course?
Well, you slept on Miss Doubtfire. Don't forget that one either.
Yeah,
they didn't get back together. I thought they would. I still watching that movie think they're going to get back together.
Do we still get that story all the time? Was there a moment in time where that story was popular?
I think maybe they went against the grain by actually getting back together. Now that I think about it, now you named something, I'm thinking of. I think there's more movies where they don't get back together.
It depends if it's a romantic comedy or sort of a dramedy, I think. I mean, yeah. Well, Mrs. Doubtfire is a comedy, but it's not a romantic comedy. Yeah, it totally depends if it's been pigeonholed. So,
I actually, with this, I didn't have a problem with them getting back together.
Me neither. I'm a sucker for this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when they show, they show Bill Paxton's new wife. Is it Rita?
Melissa.
And she's clearly a fish out of water, like city girl in the country, and like maybe it'll work. And like with this new city life, I still think this. I would guess that there's maybe 30 minutes of footage from this movie that's not in it, because they show more cool shit like the tornado and damage, as opposed to like exploring these other stories, which is fine. Like we all I think agreed that like the story's fine. Like if they wanted to have this massive character piece, they could have gone that route. But for an action, with people that want to go see Twister, it's cut exactly for people that went to go see Twister. And this movie crushed at the box office, by the way. 242 million US gross. That's insane.
Yeah, it really is.
This movie is what you were just saying, Nick. This movie is just a giant metaphor for settling down versus not. That's all it is. The Twister, yeah, Melissa on one side and the Twister and Helen on the other. Yeah.
Like we don't have Twisters in Missouri.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's this whole point. He's supposed to be, he's supposed to be giving up his wild ways. Yeah. It's like, a new job. Oh, you're just gonna stand in front of a camera and you're gonna you're gonna stay away from the storms. You can't stay away from the storms, and so like he's just as attracted to the life as he is to Helen Hunt's character. But the other thing is like, it made sense to me that they would have split in the first place. They have this big moment about halfway through the movie where they're sort of yelling at each other, and she's very upset and wants to go into another dangerous situation, and he's telling her that no, and it's like, oh, so she's obsessed in a way that's even more than he is because of her family story that we saw at the beginning when she lost her dad and stuff. And he's like, you got to stop doing that, and pay attention to what's right in front of you. What? Me? I'm talking about me. And I was like, I believe that. That sounds like a real fight somebody might have.
Yeah, but the one little issue I had with that moment, it's like, it's that sort of classic kind of, I don't know, old kind of typical cliched movie thing where it's like the man should be enough. Like, I should be enough for you. And it's like, yes, you're there. And obviously as a partner, that's great. But also she has this other greater purpose beyond you, Bill. Like, you gotta be able to,
Sure. No doubt about that. There's also plenty of stories that are about men being obsessed with their work and neglecting their families. And so it's just this notion of, it's not, but I like that it's not just her work. It's not like he doesn't want her to stop doing her work.
Yeah.
It's more like her emotional value. It's like you're wrapped up in something that happened to you when you were 7, and you're not doing anything to deal with it in a healthy way. And how am I supposed to be with you when you're stuck at age 7? And that's a whole fight. And it's like, that sounds like a real fight.
Yeah, agreed.
So what we're saying is this movie is deep.
It's pretty good. There's a lot here.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
Constantly rotating.
All wrapped up in a disaster movie. Have you guys ever been in a tornado?
Inside a tornado?
No, have you ever like, I don't mean like, have you ever been like around a tornado or like?
Yeah, the hail thing is real and weird. It's like that's really strange. We're just like, things aren't super bad, and then it's like, because that stuff comes out of nowhere in a weird way. Like, I like that this movie showed how you could be standing, a mile away, and it's, fine. It's like, that's one of the things that's freakiest about tornadoes, because at least with a hurricane, you're like, okay, the whole state is being hit by a hurricane. But a tornado, you're like, I guess I'd probably be fine, unless it like picks you.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. There is a strange random focus that tornadoes have, that even earthquakes, even though they can happen, out of nowhere, even though obviously we have better predictive methods now. It's still, earthquakes will still affect a large span of just land. So it's there's a very strange
around a tornado.
That's it. The closest thing, the earthquake thing, Lizzie, I agree. It's the closest thing we probably have, at least here. We all live in LA, so I've not been in a tornado. I've been in many hurricanes, and it's both terrifying. So it's different because hurricanes you can, for the most part, track, and like the big thing about hurricanes is you prepare for them, and then they don't come. A lot of times when they do come, they can be pretty bad, and it's scary, man. I mean, hurricanes are insane, but I was looking at, and not knowing a lot about tornado wind speeds. So they were in an F5 tornado in the movie.
At the end,
260 mile an hour wind. And just as a frame of reference, it takes 50 miles an hour of wind to uproot a tree.
Yeah, like how are they not ripped to shreds?
And they're okay. So I usually can suspend disbelief for movies, right? We watch a lot of stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can buy it. When they're at the end in this hurricane, and it's not that they like, I'm not waiting for his like legs to get pulled off, their legs to get pulled off, but I'm like, do you know how much debris would be going through them? You would have splinters like up your ass for your entire life if they were hanging in the middle of that tornado. That you would die from debris in seconds.
Yeah,
we were on when I was a kid. I was about, I don't know what, 10 or 14 or something like that. We were on a train, like one of these little trains that you take that's for like an old steam train. And it's just supposed to be fun. You go a couple miles one way or the other. But we got stuck. This is in Pennsylvania. We got stuck and had to stop at the end because a massive storm ripped through. It was a tornado storm, and like we were at the open car, and the hail and the rain is coming sideways through, and everybody's like ducked down. I remember my brother Al like hiding behind like the barrier in the window while the rain just went like bullets, and we all got soaking wet, and we took like, I don't know, 2 hours or something to get back to this little train station because there were trees all over the tracks, and there was plywood in the tops of trees because once the wind picks up with something like that, it's like it's gone. And you go, the wind can pick up a piece of plywood, but it's still a piece of plywood. If that thing comes in contact with anything, you're done.
Plywood going 50 to 250 miles an hour is quite painful.
One time I was down Jersey Shore and we saw off the deck over the water a tornado out over the ocean. So it's just the water. They call it a water spout. So it's just the water. And we're looking at it and we're like, that's beautiful. I sure as hell hope it doesn't come this way. Like it's so, when they're looking at it and they're going, it's gorgeous, but it's terrifying. I'm like, yeah, it kind of is. It really is both gorgeous and terrifying.
I got to tell you guys a quick anecdote, segue from Twister movie. So the biggest hurricane we ever had in Orlando, me and my brother, I was in Tallahassee at the time, my brother was in Jacksonville. We drove south to Orlando because it wasn't supposed to hit there. We drive home. This is right around Katrina. And the thing comes right through Orlando. And so this thing's just powering through Orlando. It's crushing everything. We're in our backyard. So the good thing is, for at least a hurricane, the wind is going one direction. So we were looking at, we were standing on our porch watching the hurricane come by, and all the winds just whipping by. And you could see the trees just ripping out of the backyard. I'm going like, those trees in our backyard are getting ripped out. My parents are like, oh, really? I'm like, yes, because there's lightning. So then, occasionally you could see lightning. Like the power goes out, so other than that you don't have like the street lights usually have. And then in the eye of the storm, my brother bets me $10 that I won't run out in the middle of the driveway.
That's such an Adam thing to do.
Yeah, but I did it. I'm still here.
You are a modern day hero, man.
I'm only laughing because I have also run out into plenty of storms. We had a nasty flash flood one time when we were teenagers, and me and my friends went out into the street that was basically a river, and we had like those big plastic things you put like a beer keg in, and we were trying to like surf the water down the thing through the gutter, and we were like 14, and the babysitter came running out, like our friend's babysitter is like, "Get the hell inside! You're all gonna drown." Yeah, that's pretty stupid. That's pretty stupid.
I've never done any of that.
Oh, Liz, next episode, we're going to take you out into the middle of a storm.
Yeah.
We can get that experience.
Yeah. No, I'm good. I'm hoping that as long as we don't have any earthquakes, I'm good. Just my life experience with that is I'm good. Okay.
I love that in this movie that we never even stay grounded physically for more than like 10 minutes, The movie begins, and it's a couple of characters. Well, first of all, after the opening scene with the tornado and Dad getting pulled out into it, after that, it goes right to two characters in a car. It's Bill and Melissa in the truck, and they're talking about the divorce papers. And then when they get to where the team is, they're only there for a few minutes, and it's like, here's a tornado, and they rush off to try to find it. This never stops, and so it's not a short movie. It's pretty long. Let's see. This movie is almost 2 hours. It hums along because you're physically never in the same spot for more than a few minutes at a time. They're like at a diner or at a house, and they're like shoving steak and eggs into their face at the aunt's house, and it's like, dude, have these people not eaten in years? And part of it, you can tell, is like they know that any moment they're gonna run away, so they don't have time to sit back and take a nap. It's like they're just going to rush off. And that pace is kept up the whole time. It's like a really good rock show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's it drops.
It does make you want to kind of do it. Or, you see the appeal despite, obviously, it being incredibly dangerous and all. It's like, yeah, this actually looks pretty fun. I could see why. You can see why
we ran out of the middle of storms.
Yeah. That's right. I'm
being in the theater and like having to like use the bathroom and being like, I can't leave.
Yeah.
This movie never stops for long enough.
It's got a lot of elements too of a road trip movie, like, which are really hard to pull off. There are many good road trip movies. There are a lot of really terrible road trip movies, but it don't, because like you said, we're never in the same place. We're following the same people, and there's these elements of it that actually kind of make it a road trip movie. which is
and like a sort of more violent action movie where some of these conversations that say Bill is having with Melissa or that Bill is having with Joe, where in another like a lesser a director or a more poorly directed movie, they'd be sitting around a cafe or like standing in a park, talking to each other. In this case, they're always like in a car rushing toward a tornado or something like that while they're having the discussion. So it's like even the stuff that's real talky, it's in a context that's like
hail and
corn fly.
You know how it passes the exciting test is, I don't know if you guys ever went on this ride, but we did get a Universal ride for Twister.
Oh, I wish we saw it.
It was awesome.
Oh, I do not remember it. What was that like?
So it was like it wasn't a stunt spectacular. It was more like a stage spectacular. So everything would happen on the stage. They would blow wind through the stage. There'd be water like splashing in different places. But it was just, and they would have like the wind funnels going through. It was on like a more smaller scale. It was awesome. I remember distinctly the Twister ride. But we always talk about a lot of times for film Flashback, especially for action. Would this be a good ride? And a lot of times it's like, well, actually it was a ride. And then it just got replaced by.
I was thinking that because I didn't remember. I must have never gotten on it. I was thinking, God, what a great ride! Getting that truck.
I do remember the truck coming down. I think they later turned this into Earthquake. I know at Universal Hollywood, it's Earthquake.
That big tanker truck, like with the gasoline.
Yeah, very similar to how Twister was. Very similar to how Twister. So you feel the fire from the gas, the gas truck.
This movie, that's a hell of an explosion because there were actually a couple of moments where I legit sitting in my couch at home started clapping like I was in the theater, going like, "Woo!" That was epic! And like one of them was when that truck blew up. I was like, "Damn!"
Yeah, like it should have blown up in Duel. You mean? That's a throwback to the very first ever film Flashback episode.
Yeah. I just saw that for the first time. I watched it like 2 weeks ago. It was better.
Not to digress, but what'd you think about the end?
It was a little anticlimactic.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was like, what? How's he gonna get home?
Exactly. And Liz, there's not one Steven Spielberg movie that's passed since that he's produced or directed that he doesn't have something blow up in it.
Yeah. No, I thought that thing was full of flammable.
You mean the caution flammable truck?
Yeah. But that is a rolling like garbage heap. Like, come on, this thing is the most flammable thing.
We decided that is why Steven Spielberg blew up the shark at the end of Jaws.
Yeah. To make up for that,
It makes way less sense for that shark to blow up, but he was like, I'm not doing this again.
I got an extra.
I really like this. I'm so glad we went back and checked it out again because I hadn't seen it in years. It's funny because it's so fun and intense, but it also gets to be PG-13.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that. And it was just nice to see Philip and Bill, in action again. R.I.P.
Yeah, I think this holds up for sure. I think it's a fun watch. It's so fast paced and like compared to any other, I would say like movies if you consider like Independence Day a disaster movie, but I think as far as disaster movies go, this is the best one. I mean, Dante Peak is pretty good. Dante's Peak. There's been a couple other disaster movies that are okay, but like this one just works. And I think it's because it's well acted. You got Steven Spielberg, kind of orchestrating from what it seems like. It's shot well, and the practical effects, along with the CGI, I think are. I
really don't think there's much in here that dates it.
I agree.
The cell phone.
Well, I mean, but she has a cell phone.
Yeah.
And she's using it a lot, and it works really well.
Yeah, it's got better reception than I do from my living room.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, Liz, she's in a tornado like every 10 minutes, and she's still taking crystal clear calls
with her
clients.
Now, Warren, I need you to calm down now.
I'm surprised that they didn't, when you look at like sponsorships and endorsements for movies, whoever it would have been like AT&T or Sprint, that's the thing I would have wanted. Oh, let me answer my Sprint phone. Like,
Yeah.
I want people to know that my service, we can go on in a tornado.
In a tornado.
Or maybe that's what they
Use a different brand and have the call get dropped all the time.
Oh, Boots Mobile, not another drop. Oh.
The days before product placement, just brazen product placement everywhere. Yeah.
I think that this movie, again, like I was saying, I don't think it's very dated. You could literally just release this movie just now in 2020. It'd probably do really well. Like, we don't have to change anything.
Because I didn't know anything about I don't know anything about tornado science. Like, I'm sure they figured a lot of this stuff out, but I was still like, oh yeah, that's cool. That's a good idea. Get the little sensors up in the tornado.
Yeah, I tried to make one of those. I texted you guys that when we were watching. I tried to make a Dorothy.
Did you?
And it did not. I put some things in a shoebox. And,
things?
Which you can probably. I think I made them out of tinfoil.
A lot
As
of
you can
tinfoil.
imagine, it did not
take
go as well.
Well, it doesn't work.
It was more like the first 3 times they tried in the movie than the last one.
But you were in hurricane country, not tornado country. So
yeah, it was also like the middle, non-hurricane season. But
So, Nikki, what did you learn? Windy, super windy.
It would have worked if there was a little more wind.
Well, this
Basically,
is
just littered.
it's just called, not Dorothy. It's called Litter 3. Thanks for joining us, Liz. This was a ton of fun.
Oh, as always, I so appreciate it. You guys are great.
If you're watching on YouTube, you can check out the podcast version or recommend the podcast version of this, which will always come out the next day. This will be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio. And of course, please, if you're listening, check out our YouTube channel, Handlebar TV. Just search Handlebar TV on any of those things. And we'll be back with another film flashback next week. And so, like I said, thanks, Nick, for joining me once again. And of course, Liz. And we'll see you next time on Film Flashback.